Why does a simple burger order sometimes feel like the most dangerous transaction in the world? The fluorescent lights of Bernie's diner hummed with their usual tired buzz, casting that sickly yellow glow over the cracked vinyl booths and grease-stained menus. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, that dead zone between lunch rush and early dinner, when time seems to stop completely inside these roadside establishments. The kind of place where truckers grab coffee that tastes like burnt rubber and college kids nurse hangovers with plate-sized pancakes. Nothing ever happens here. Nothing ever changes. The same faces behind the counter, the same complaints about tips, the same ketchup stains on table 7 that nobody ever quite manages to scrub away completely. Marcus Chen sat in the corner booth, his leather jacket draped over the worn seat beside him, a newspaper spread open in front of him like he actually cared about the local sports scores. But his eyes weren't reading. They were scanning. Always scanning. 3 exits, including the kitchen door. 2 security cameras, 1 broken. The cook visible through the service window, distracted by his phone. 4 other customers scattered throughout the diner, none of them interesting, none of them threats. He'd been trained to notice everything, to catalogue every detail, every potential variable in any environment. 7 years with the agency does that to you. It rewires your brain until you can't walk into a coffee shop without identifying cover positions and calculating response times. Until a simple lunch break becomes a tactical exercise you can't turn off, even when you desperately want to. The waitress who'd taken his order 20 minutes ago hadn't returned. That wasn't unusual. Service here moved at the pace of continental drift. Marcus didn't mind. He wasn't actually hungry. The burger was just an excuse, a prop in the performance of being normal, of being nobody worth noticing. Today was supposed to be simple surveillance. Watch the pawn shop across the street. Document who comes and goes. Standard assignment. The kind that makes you question your life choices. Sitting in a dying diner watching a dying business in a town that forgot it was dying decades ago. Then the door chimed. An elderly man shuffled inside. Maybe 75, maybe older. He wore a faded veteran's cap and a jacket 2 sizes too big for his thin frame. The kind of outfit that tells a story of better days and harder times. His hands trembled slightly as he steadied himself against the hostess stand, catching his breath like the simple act of entering the building had exhausted him. His eyes had that distant quality Marcus had seen before, the look of someone who'd been disappointed by the world so many times they'd stopped expecting anything different. The old man made his way to the counter, each step deliberate and careful, and lowered himself onto one of the chrome stools with the slow precision of someone whose joints didn't cooperate anymore. He sat there for a moment, just breathing, before reaching into his jacket pocket and carefully counting out crumpled bills and loose change onto the counter, organizing them into small piles. Checking and rechecking the amount like he was calculating something precious and irreplaceable. Marcus folded his newspaper slightly, his attention caught despite himself. The waiter who approached wasn't the woman who'd taken Marcus's order. This was someone else. Mid-20s athletic build, with that particular smugness that comes from peaking in high school and never quite adjusting to the reality that followed. His name tag said Brandon in faded letters, and his expression as he looked at the old man could only be described as contempt, wrapped in the thinnest veneer of customer service. "Help you?" Brandon's voice carried across the near-empty diner with an edge sharp enough to cut. The old man's voice was soft, dignified despite its shakiness. "Yes, please. Could I get a coffee and maybe... Do you have any soup today? Something warm?" Brandon glanced at the money on the counter, then back at the old man's face. "Soup's $6.50, coffee's $2.25. That's $8.75 plus tax. You got enough there?" The old man's fingers moved through the bills again, his counting slowing, becoming more uncertain. I believe I have $9. Is that enough? Let me see." Brandon reached out and swept the money toward himself. counting it with exaggerated slowness, making each movement a performance of condescension. $7.40. Looks like you're short, old man. But I thought... The veteran started, confusion clouding his features. You thought wrong. Brandon cut him off, his voice rising just enough to ensure anyone listening would hear every word. Maybe learn to count before you come in here wasting my time. We're not running a charity. This ain't a soup kitchen for every broke old... Marcus's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Something ancient and instinctive stirred in his chest. Something his training hadn't erased. Couldn't erase. He'd spent years learning to suppress reactions, to observe without interfering, to prioritize mission objectives over emotional impulses. But there are moments when training encounters something deeper, something that predates protocols and procedures, something human. The old man was gathering his money with shaking hands, his face flushed with humiliation, mumbling apologies that no one should ever have to make for the crime of being poor and hungry. Brandon was still talking, his voice carrying that performative cruelty that certain people mistake for power. And don't come back unless you can actually afford... I'll take care of it. Marcus's voice cut through the diner like a blade through water, quiet but absolute. Both Brandon and the old man turned to look at him. Marcus was already standing, moving toward the counter with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked into far more dangerous situations than a small-town diner. But Brandon didn't know that. Couldn't know that. All he saw was another customer, maybe one he could push around too. This doesn't concern you, buddy, Brandon said, his chest puffing slightly, that territorial aggression of someone defending what they perceive as their domain. Marcus reached the counter, his movements unhurried, almost casual. He placed a $20 bill next to the old man's collected change. The gentleman's order, coffee and soup, and whatever else he wants. Keep the change. The air in the diner shifted, became heavier somehow. The cook had stopped scrolling through his phone. The other customers had gone quiet, forks suspended mid-bite. Brandon's jaw tightened. Look, hero, I don't know who you think... Brandon. Marcus said his name like he was reading it off a database, and something in his tone made the waiter pause. I'm going to need you to apologize to this man, right now. Brandon laughed, but it sounded hollow, uncertain. Or what? Marcus smiled, and it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, the kind that made Brandon's instincts scream warnings his pride refused to hear. Or I handle your service quality issues a different way. In the corner booth, Marcus's phone began to vibrate. Once, twice, the pattern he'd been waiting for, the signal from across the street, the target was moving. The actual reason he was here, the surveillance operation, the job he was supposed to be doing, it was all happening right now. But Marcus didn't move toward the door, didn't even glance at his phone. Because sometimes there are things more important than following orders. The silence in Bernie's diner stretched like a tightrope, thin and dangerous, waiting for someone to take that first fatal step. Brandon's face had gone from smug confidence to something harder to read, a cocktail of confusion and wounded pride, mixing with the first bitter drops of actual fear. He wasn't used to being challenged, not here in his domain where he was king of a crumbling empire built on minimum wage and the small power of deciding who deserved courtesy and who didn't. Marcus could feel the weight of his phone in his pocket, still vibrating in that urgent pattern. 3 short pulses. Pause. 3 more. The target was exiting the pawn shop, getting into a vehicle. Every second of delay meant information lost, trails growing cold, potential evidence disappearing into the sprawl of interstate highways and anonymous motels that stretched across this forgotten corner of America. His handler would be furious. There would be questions, reports, explanations required in sterile conference rooms under fluorescent lights that somehow felt more oppressive than this diner's dying bulbs. But Marcus had learned something in 7 years of following orders. of prioritizing objectives over humanity, of watching bad things happen to good people because the mission required his non-interference. He'd learned that you can lose yourself one compromise at a time, one ignored injustice at a time, one moment of chosen blindness at a time, until one day you wake up and realize you've become the kind of person who can watch an old veteran get humiliated over soup money and feel nothing at all. He wasn't there yet. Not quite. And maybe that meant something. Brandon's hand hovered near the register, his fingers twitching like he was calculating options, running scenarios. You threatening me? I'm giving you an opportunity, Marcus replied, his voice still carrying that dangerous calm. To be a better version of yourself than you were 30 seconds ago. It's more than you gave him. He gestured toward the old man, who sat frozen on his stool, caught between gratitude and the deep shame of being the object of charity, of being the cause of conflict. The cook had emerged from the kitchen now, a heavy-set man with tattoo sleeves and the cautious eyes of someone who'd seen enough bar fights to know when one was brewing. Everything okay out here, Brandon? Before the waiter could answer, the elderly man spoke up, his voice stronger than before but still trembling at the edges. It's all right. I should just go. I don't want any trouble. You're not the trouble, Marcus said, not looking away from Brandon. You're a customer who deserves basic human decency. That shouldn't be controversial. Something flickered across the old man's face then. Something that might have been gratitude or might have been the painful recognition of his own diminished status in the world, of being someone who needed defending, who couldn't defend himself anymore. His hand moved unconsciously to his veteran's cap, adjusting it with the automatic gesture of someone who'd spent decades in uniform, who'd once been strong and capable and self-sufficient. Korea, the old man said quietly, though no one had asked. Incheon. I was 19 years old, scared out of my mind, but I did my duty, did what my country asked of me. His eyes met Marcus's, and there was steel beneath the age, beneath the trembling hands and faded jacket. I'm not asking for special treatment. Never have. Just wanted some soup and to be treated like I'm still human, you know. The words hung in the air like an accusation, indicting not just Brandon, but something larger, some failure of the social contract that had allowed a man who'd risked his life for strangers to be sneered at by someone young enough to be his grandson over $8 and change. Brandon's face had gone red, mottled with emotions he probably couldn't name. Look, old man, I didn't know you were. It wouldn't matter if he wasn't, Marcus interrupted. Every person who walks through that door deserves your respect, until they prove otherwise. That's not complicated. That's not asking too much. The waiter's jaw worked silently, pride warring with the uncomfortable awareness that he'd become the villain in a story being witnessed by everyone in the diner. The other customers weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. A middle-aged woman in a business suit had her phone out, angled toward the counter. Recording maybe, or ready to. The digital age had turned everyone into potential documentarians of injustice, and Brandon was smart enough to know that viral shame was a real consequence even if physical confrontation wasn't. Marcus's phone had stopped vibrating. The moment had passed. Whatever intelligence he was supposed to gather was gone now, dissipated into the afternoon like smoke. His handler would be checking his GPS, seeing that he hadn't moved, making assumptions and preparing consequences. But standing here, watching Brandon's face cycle through its emotional gymnastics, Marcus found he couldn't regret the choice. I apologize, Brandon finally said, the words coming out like pulled teeth, each syllable a small agony of swallowed pride. His eyes flicked to the woman with the phone, then back to the old man. I was out of line. Sir, your orders on the house. It wasn't sincere. Marcus could hear the resentment underneath, the anger at being forced into humility rather than choosing it. But sincerity could come later, maybe, if the lesson took root. Sometimes behavior changes before understanding does. Sometimes you fake decency until it becomes habit. The old man nodded slowly, accepting the apology with more grace than it deserved. "Thank you, son. I appreciate that." The cook cleared his throat, breaking the tension like a hammer through glass. "I'll get your soup heated up, sir. You want the chicken noodle or the chili?" "Chicken noodle would be wonderful, thank you kindly." As the cook retreated to the kitchen and Brandon busied himself with unnecessary organization of the condiment station, clearly desperate to escape the weight of being perceived, Marcus felt the old man's hand on his arm. The grip was weak but insistent. "Thank you," the veteran said, his voice dropping to something meant just for Marcus. "But you didn't have to do that. Make yourself a target of his anger. People like him, they remember slights. They hold grudges." Marcus smiled, a real one this time. "I can handle Brandon." "I'm sure you can, but that's not what worries me." The old man's eyes were sharper now, more focused, and Marcus recognized the look of someone who'd done their own share of reading people, of assessing threats. "You've got the look of someone who's fought different kinds of battles, harder ones than this. And you're sitting in this diner in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon pretending to read a newspaper while watching something across the street. I may be old, but I'm not blind." Marcus felt something cold slide down his spine. The old man's observation was too accurate, too specific. "Sir, I think you might be giving you advice," the veteran continued, cutting him off gently. "When you're my age, you realize that the big, heroic moments don't define you. It's the small choices, the Tuesday afternoons in dying diners when nobody's watching, when you could just look away and follow your orders and let the world be cruel to people who don't matter to your mission." He squeezed Marcus's arm once more before letting go. "You chose right today. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before Marcus could respond, before he could process the uncomfortable accuracy of being seen so clearly by a stranger, the diner's door chimed again. The man who entered wasn't remarkable at first glance. Mid-40s, worn jeans, flannel shirt, the kind of forgettable appearance that could blend into any working-class environment, from construction sites to warehouse loading docks. But Marcus noticed details that others wouldn't. The way his eyes swept the room in a pattern that suggested training. The slight bulge under his shirt on the right hip. The deliberate casual posture that was actually coiled readiness. And the tattoo on his neck, just visible above his collar. 3 interlocking circles. Marcus felt his pulse kick up a notch. He knew that symbol. Had seen it in briefing files and surveillance photos. It belonged to the Volkov network, the organization he'd been tracking for 6 months. The same organization connected to the pawn shop across the street, to the money laundering and weapons trafficking that spread like cancer through small towns exactly like this one. The man's eyes landed on Marcus, held there for just a fraction too long, then moved on to scan the rest of the diner. Calculating, assessing, making his own tactical evaluations. He sat down 3 booths away from where Marcus had been sitting, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the windows, where he could see everyone in the diner, including Marcus. This wasn't coincidence. This was a test, or a confrontation, or both. The cook emerged from the kitchen with a steaming bowl of soup, setting it down in front of the old veteran with uncharacteristic gentleness. "There you go, sir. Best chicken noodle in 3 counties, or so my grandmother used to claim." "I'm sure it's wonderful," the old man replied. But his attention had shifted too. He'd noticed the new arrival, noticed something in the air that had changed. Danger has a frequency that people who've lived through wars can always hear. Brandon approached the new customer with his ordering pad, his earlier humiliation apparently forgotten or at least suppressed beneath the requirements of his job. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black, and whatever burger special you're running." The man's voice was flat, accentless, the vocal equivalent of his forgettable appearance. But his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging, calculating. Marcus's mind raced through scenarios. His cover was simple, meant to withstand casual scrutiny, but not serious investigation. If this man was here because the network had somehow identified him, if his months of careful surveillance had been compromised, then this quiet diner was about to become something very different. And there were civilians here. The old veteran, the other customers, the cook and Brandon, both of whom deserved better than being caught in crossfire they didn't understand. His training said to leave, exit through the kitchen, abort the operation, regroup at the safe house, call for backup. Standard protocol for blown cover. But his instincts, the same ones that had made him intervene with Brandon, told him that leaving now would be abandoning these people to whatever came next. The man with the three-circle tattoo smiled slightly, as if reading Marcus's internal conflict on his face. He raised his coffee cup in a small salute, a gesture that might have been greeting or might have been mockery, and in that moment, Marcus Chen realized that his simple surveillance operation had just become something far more complicated, and that his choice to defend an old veteran over a bowl of soup might have consequences that rippled far beyond basic human decency. The coffee in the tattooed man's cup sent up thin ribbons of steam that twisted and dissolved in the diner's stale air like secrets being whispered and forgotten simultaneously. Marcus forced himself to look away, to return to his booth with measured steps that betrayed none of the adrenaline now flooding his system. Every instinct screamed at him to assess the threat, to maintain visual contact, to keep the potential enemy in his sightline. But doing so would confirm whatever suspicions had brought this man here, would validate the surveillance, and transform possibility into certainty. So instead, Marcus sat down, picked up his newspaper, and pretended to care about high school basketball scores while his peripheral vision tracked every movement 3 booths away. It was a skill he'd honed over years, the ability to seem oblivious while missing nothing, to project casual disinterest while cataloging every detail that might mean the difference between life and death. The old veteran was eating his soup with slow, deliberate spoonfuls, savoring each bite with the appreciation of someone who understood hunger, not as inconvenience but as genuine hardship. Between bites, his eyes would drift toward Marcus, then toward the tattooed man, his expression troubled in ways that went beyond the earlier humiliation. He'd survived Korea by learning to read danger, and whatever he was reading now had him worried. Brandon delivered the burger to the tattooed man, with none of the hostility he'd shown the veteran, his body language deferential, almost nervous. Maybe he sensed something too, that predatory quality that certain people carry like an invisible signature. Or maybe he just recognized that some customers you don't mess with, not because of money or status, but because of something harder to define and more dangerous to miscalculate. Marcus's phone buzzed again, a different pattern this time. A text message. He pulled it out, angled the screen away from potential watchers, and read the 3 words that appeared. Extraction compromised. Abort now. His jaw tightened. Extraction referred to Viktor Sokolov, a mid-level Volkov network operative who'd agreed to flip, to provide testimony in exchange for witness protection. He'd been hiding in a safe house 2 towns over, waiting for transport. If the extraction was compromised, it meant the network knew about the turncoat, which meant they knew about the investigation, which meant Marcus's months of careful infiltration, of building covers and establishing patterns, might all be burning down around him while he sat in a diner defending his choice to intervene in a minor act of casual cruelty. He typed back quickly, "Status of asset?" The response came within seconds. "Unknown. Team went dark. Assume hostile acquisition." Marcus felt his stomach drop. A team went dark meant agents were dead or captured, meant that professionals with training equal to his own had been outmaneuvered, overpowered, eliminated. The Volkov network was brutal but usually not suicidal. They operated in shadows, avoided direct confrontation with federal agents. If they'd moved openly against an extraction team, it meant they were confident enough in their position to accept the escalation, the increased scrutiny that would follow. It meant they thought they'd already won. The tattooed man took a bite of his burger, chewing slowly, his eyes finding Marcus's across the diner. No pretense now, no subtlety, just a direct acknowledgement of mutual awareness. He swallowed, took a sip of coffee and smiled again, wider this time. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up, leaving his half-eaten burger on the plate, and walked directly toward Marcus's booth. Every muscle in Marcus's body coiled, ready to respond to whatever came next. His hand moved unconsciously toward the concealed holster at the small of his back, fingers brushing the grip of his service weapon. But drawing it here now in front of civilians would be a last resort that carried its own cascade of catastrophic consequences. The man stopped at Marcus's booth, standing there with the casual confidence of someone who held all the cards and knew it. Up close, Marcus could see details he'd missed from across the room. Scars on the knuckles, suggesting extensive hand-to-hand combat. A slight irregularity in the way he held his left arm, like an old injury that had healed imperfectly, and eyes that were completely dead, flat as stones at the bottom of a cold river. "Mind if I sit?" The man's voice carried a hint of accent now, something Eastern European buried beneath careful American pronunciation. "Actually, I do." The man sat down anyway, sliding into the booth across from Marcus with the ease of someone accustomed to ignoring boundaries. "You made a mistake today, Agent Chen." Hearing his real name spoken aloud in this context sent ice through Marcus's veins, but he kept his expression neutral, almost bored. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "No confusion. Marcus Chen. 7 years with the agency, specialization in organized crime infiltration, currently assigned to Operation Daybreak, investigating my employer's business interests in this region." The man's smile never wavered. "You've been very thorough, very patient, watching our pawn shop across the street for 3 weeks now, documenting transactions, building your case piece by piece." Marcus said nothing, his mind racing through implications and protocols. If his cover was this thoroughly blown, if they knew not just his identity but his assignment details, then someone had talked. Someone with access to operational security, someone inside. "The mistake," the man continued, "wasn't the surveillance. We expected that eventually. Federal agencies are predictable, bureaucratic, but eventually competent. No, your mistake was intervening just now, with the waiter and the old man." He gestured toward the counter where the veteran sat, now watching them with barely concealed alarm. "You see, we've been watching you watching us, trying to establish your patterns, understand your priorities, figure out what kind of agent you are." "And what kind is that?" "The dangerous kind." The man leaned back, entirely at ease. "The kind who makes decisions based on conscience instead of calculation, who can't walk past injustice even when the mission requires it, who chooses people over objectives." He said it like a diagnosis, a fatal character flaw. Those are the agents who can't be predicted, can't be managed, can't be neutralized through normal means. Through the diner's window, Marcus caught movement across the street. 2 men entering the pawn shop, moving with purpose. Not customers. Something else. The tattooed man noticed Marcus's attention shift. "They're collecting evidence right now, sanitizing the location. By the time your backup arrives, assuming you've already called them, there will be nothing to find, just another struggling business in a dying town. You're telling me this because I'm offering you a choice, Agent Chen, an opportunity that won't come again." The man pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket, sliding it across the table. Marcus looked down and felt his blood turn to ice water. The photograph showed Viktor Sokolov, the would-be defector, sitting in what looked like a basement. His face was bruised, swollen, marked by the kind of careful violence that suggests interrogation rather than simple beating. But he was alive, conscious, looking at the camera with eyes that held a terrible mixture of hope and despair. "Your asset is still breathing," the man said quietly. "Still salvageable, but not for long. My employers want to make an example, send a message about the consequences of betrayal. They're very creative in their messaging, very thorough." Marcus forced himself to look up from the photograph. "What do you want?" "Walk away, right now. Get in your car, drive back to your field office, report that the surveillance was unproductive, that the pawn shop is legitimate, the leads were bad, the entire operation was based on faulty intelligence." The man's dead eyes studied Marcus's face. "Do that, and your asset lives. We'll dump him at a hospital in another state, anonymous patient, no charges. He'll be too terrified to talk, and without his testimony, your case falls apart anyway. Everyone goes home. Simple. And if I refuse, then Victor dies very badly, very slowly, and we release the video to every news outlet and social media platform we can find. Let the world see what happens to people under federal protection. Let them see how thoroughly you failed him." The man paused, letting that sink in. "But more than that, Agent Chen, we expand our operations here. See, we've been considering whether this territory is worth the investment. Your intervention today tells us this is a community worth controlling, worth influencing. So we stay. We grow. We recruit the Brandons of the world, the angry young men looking for purpose and power. We turn this dying town into something useful." Marcus felt the trap closing around him, the impossible choice being offered like a gift. Save one man by abandoning his investigation, by letting organized crime entrench itself deeper into communities that were already struggling. Or maintain his principles, pursue justice, and watch Viktor Sokolov die for the crime of believing the federal government could protect him. The old veteran was standing now, moving slowly toward their booth. His soup sat forgotten on the counter. His hands were steadier than they'd been before, his bearing more erect. And in that moment, Marcus could see the young Marine he'd once been, the warrior underneath the accumulated years. "Leave him alone," the veteran said, his voice carrying surprising authority. "Whatever business you have, conduct it outside, not here." The tattooed man glanced up, irritation flickering across his dead eyes. "Old man, this doesn't concern. It concerns me when predators hunt in places I'm eating." The veteran's hand was in his jacket pocket now, and something in his stance suggested he wasn't just carrying memories of Korea. "I said leave. Now." For the first time, the tattooed man looked uncertain. Whatever he'd planned for this confrontation, it hadn't included interference from an elderly veteran who should have been easy to dismiss. He stood slowly, his casual confidence cracking slightly. "Think about my offer, Agent Chen. You have until midnight. After that, we start sending Victor back to you in pieces." He looked at the old man, his smile returning but colder now, more dangerous. "And you, grandfather, should learn when to mind your own business. People who interfere in things they don't understand tend to have very unfortunate accidents." The veteran didn't flinch. "I understand bullies. Understood them in 1950, understand them now. Different uniform, same cowardice." The tattooed man's jaw tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought violence would erupt right there in the diner. But instead, the man simply turned and walked toward the exit, pausing at the door to look back one more time. "Midnight, Agent Chen. Choose wisely." Then he was gone, leaving behind his half-eaten burger and a photograph of a man whose life depended on decisions Marcus would have to make in the hours ahead. The veteran slid into the booth where the tattooed man had been sitting, moving with more confidence now, his trembling hands steady. He looked at the photograph, then at Marcus, his eyes sad but knowing. "You're going to try to save everyone, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. The man in the picture, this town, your principles, all of it. Marcus nodded slowly, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "That's what I thought," the veteran said softly. "That's what always made you the dangerous kind. Not because you're willing to fight, but because you're willing to lose everything for people you don't even know." He reached across the table, placed his weathered hand on Marcus's. "I'm going to tell you something I learned bleeding in a frozen foxhole outside Seoul. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the game entirely, to refuse the choices they give you and make your own." "How?" The old man smiled, and suddenly he didn't look quite so old anymore. "By remembering that you're not alone. You defended me when you didn't have to, when it cost you your mission. Let me return the favor." He pulled his hand back, and Marcus saw something had been left behind on the table. A business card, worn but still legible, a name, a phone number, and 3 words that made Marcus's breath catch. Defense Intelligence Agency. "You're not just a veteran," Marcus whispered. "Retired analyst, specialized in Russian organized crime networks, 30 years of service before my pension kicked in." The old man's smile turned rueful. "These days I mostly just want soup and coffee without being reminded that I'm old and poor and invisible. But I still have clearance, still have contacts, still have access to databases that might tell us things about that man with the tattoos that could change this whole equation." Marcus stared at the card, understanding dawning like sunrise after a long dark night. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" "Because I needed to see what kind of man you were, whether you'd defend a stranger for no tactical advantage, whether your conscience was genuine or just another operational tool." The old man stood, leaving money on the table for his soup, despite it being comped. "Meet me at this address in 2 hours, and bring everything you have on the Volkov network. It's time to teach these young criminals that the old guard isn't quite as helpless as we look." As the veteran walked toward the exit, his gait steadier than it had been when he entered, Marcus realized that nothing about this day had been what it seemed. And suddenly, the impossible choice he'd been given felt less like a trap and more like an opportunity, if only he was brave enough to see it. The address on the business card led Marcus to a neighborhood that time had treated more kindly than the rest of town, where the houses still had fresh paint and the lawns weren't surrendering to weeds. The veteran's home was a modest ranch-style structure with wind chimes hanging from the porch, their gentle music a stark contrast to the storm building inside Marcus's chest. He'd spent the drive here wrestling with variables and contingencies, running scenarios that all ended in variations of failure. By the time he knocked on the door, he'd convinced himself this was either salvation or the final mistake that would cost Viktor Sokolov his life. The man who answered bore little resemblance to the trembling figure from the diner. He stood straighter now, his eyes sharp and analytical, behind reading glasses perched on his nose. The veteran's cap was gone, revealing close-cropped white hair that suggested military discipline never quite faded. He stepped aside without a word, gesturing Marcus into a living room that looked like any other retired person's sanctuary, complete with photographs of grandchildren and a television playing the evening news on mute, except for the den visible through a partially open door, where the blue glow of multiple computer monitors cast shadows that danced like digital ghosts. "Coffee?" the veteran asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "You look like you need it." "I need answers more." Marcus remained standing, his body thrumming with urgency that made stillness feel like betrayal. "You said you could help. Viktor Sokolov has maybe 6 hours before they start killing him in ways designed to make him scream. I don't have time for what? Proper preparation? Intelligence gathering? Strategic planning?" The old man's voice cut through Marcus's desperation like a surgeon's blade, precise and necessary. "That's exactly the mindset they're counting on, Agent Chen. They gave you a deadline to make you panic, to force decisions based on emotion rather than analysis. It's standard psychological warfare, and you should know better." The rebuke stung because it was accurate. Marcus took a breath, forced himself to sit on the worn couch, to quiet the screaming urgency that wanted him to do something, anything, immediately. "You're right. I'm sorry. You care about your asset, about your mission, about doing the right thing." The veteran returned with 2 mugs of coffee that smelled infinitely better than the diner's burnt offering. "That's not weakness, son. That's why you're still human after 7 years of this work. But right now, we need you to be more than human. We need you to be smarter than they expect." Through the window, twilight was surrendering to full darkness, and Marcus could feel the hours until midnight ticking away like a countdown to detonation. Somewhere in a warehouse 15 miles south, Viktor Sokolov was praying that someone would come for him, that the promises of federal protection meant something more than empty words and abandoned hope. Marcus pulled out his official phone, typed a message to Reeves. "Cover blown. Surveillance compromised. Aborting operation per protocol. Request immediate extraction and debriefing." His finger hesitated over the send button for just a moment, understanding that this single action would set in motion a sequence of events that would either save lives or destroy them, would either bring justice or enable greater darkness. He pressed send. The veteran watched the message disappear into the digital ether, then nodded once, sharp and definitive. "Now we start the real operation, the one they won't see coming until it's too late." He began pulling up files, blueprints, tactical overlays. "We have 6 hours to plan an assault on a fortified position held by professional criminals who've already proven they can take down a federal extraction team. No backup, no official support, just an old analyst and 1 rogue agent against an organization that spent 20 years learning how to win." "Those aren't good odds," Marcus observed. "No," the veteran agreed, his smile sharp and somehow youthful despite the years etched in his face. "But they're honest odds. No betrayal, no hidden agendas, no wondering whose side everyone's really on. Just 2 people trying to do the right thing against people who stopped caring about right and wrong a long time ago." He pulled up a weapons inventory on one of his screens. "Besides, I didn't spend 3 decades studying these bastards without learning a few things they don't expect old men to know." Marcus's phone buzzed. Reeves responding. "Acknowledged. Return to Safe House Alpha for debrief. We'll coordinate exfiltration. Good work on survival, Chen." The words looked sincere, sounded concerned, and were probably being forwarded to Volkov's people before Marcus even finished reading them. Somewhere, the tattooed man was receiving confirmation that Agent Chen had broken, had accepted defeat, would be no further trouble. They were wrong. Marcus looked at the screens, at the warehouse layout, at the impossible task ahead of them, and felt something he hadn't felt since joining the agency 7 years ago. Not confidence exactly, not even hope. Just the simple certainty that regardless of outcome, regardless of cost, he was finally doing exactly what he'd signed up to do when he first took his oath to protect and serve. Not the bureaucracy, not the protocols, not the careful political calculations. The people. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, pulling up a chair beside the veteran. "Every detail you have about that warehouse. Every weakness in their security. Every advantage we can create." The old analyst smiled, and for the first time since entering his home, Marcus saw not just the retired intelligence officer, but the young Marine who'd survived frozen Korea by learning that sometimes the only way to win an impossible fight is to commit to it completely. "Let's bring your man home," the veteran said, and began laying out a plan that had approximately 0 chance of working by any reasonable tactical assessment. Which was exactly why it might succeed. The warehouse district at night felt like the skeleton of some long-dead industrial dream, all rusted bones and hollow promises of prosperity that never materialized. Marcus drove past the target location twice, windows down, letting the cold air sharpen his senses while memorizing every detail the satellite imagery couldn't capture. the sound of gravel under tires, the way shadows pooled between buildings, the faint glow of lights from the third structure on the left, the one that shouldn't have power according to city records, but clearly did. The veteran sat beside him, no longer trembling, his hands steady on a tablet displaying real-time thermal imaging pulled from resources Marcus didn't ask about and the old man didn't volunteer. Some doors once opened were better left unexamined. What mattered was the information, and what it revealed made Marcus's chest tighten with equal parts dread and determination. 12 heat signatures in the main warehouse. 2 vehicles parked in patterns, suggesting rapid departure capability. Guards rotating in shifts that suggested military training. This wasn't some improvised holding facility. This was a statement, a declaration that the Volkov network felt secure enough to operate a full tactical facility in the open, protected by corruption that ran deeper than Marcus had imagined possible. 3 guards outside, the veteran murmured, zooming in on the thermal display. Standard triangle formation, overlapping fields of fire. Professional setup. They're not expecting trouble, but they're ready for it. Marcus parked 3 blocks away, killing the engine and letting silence settle around them like a shroud. Through the burner phone, he could hear his official phone still active in the glove compartment, its GPS signal feeding Reeves false confidence that her compromised agent was heading toward the safe house as instructed. By now, she'd have relayed his compliance to Volkov's people. By now, they'd be celebrating their victory, certain that fear had accomplished what violence might have complicated. Last chance to reconsider, Marcus said, not because he wanted to, but because fairness demanded it. You don't owe me this. Don't owe Victor. You could go home, enjoy your retirement, let someone else fight this fight. The veteran checked the magazine on a pistol that looked older than Marcus, but well-maintained, its grip worn smooth by decades of familiar hands. I could, but then I'd have to live with myself, and that's gotten harder as I've gotten older. He looked up, his eyes reflecting streetlight like distant stars. You know what keeps me awake at night. Not the operations that went wrong, not the agents we lost, but the moments I chose protocol over people, chose the mission over the human cost. Every time I made that choice, I told myself it was necessary, strategic, the only rational decision. He holstered the weapon with practiced ease. But rationality is just another word for cowardice sometimes, for choosing the easy path because the right one demands too much. A pause, heavy with accumulated years. Today in that diner, you showed me someone who hasn't learned that particular form of surrender yet, who still thinks an old man's dignity matters more than operational security. That's not weakness, son. That's the only thing worth fighting for. Marcus felt something shift in his throat, some barrier between professional distance and actual connection crumbling. Thank you for this, for believing I was worth the risk. Thank me when we're done. The veteran pulled up the tactical overlay one more time, committing it to memory. We go in quiet, neutralize external security first, then breach through the northwest loading dock. Their cameras are focused on primary entrances, leaving a blind spot approximately 3 meters wide. Old facility, old security thinking. They relied on isolation instead of comprehensive coverage. And inside we adapt, react, survive. The old man's smile was grim. No plan survives first contact, but we have advantages they don't expect. They think you're broken, think you're running. They won't be watching for an assault, especially not one from a supposedly compromised agent and a retired analyst who should be home watching television and forgetting how to be dangerous. They moved through darkness like memories of younger selves. Muscle memory, overriding the years that should have slowed them both. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his weapon, the heightened awareness that came with understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether Viktor Sokolov lived or died, whether justice meant anything or was just another comfortable fiction people told themselves, while evil operated unchecked. The first guard never saw them coming. Marcus approached from the blind side, using shadows and patience, closing the distance until he was near enough to smell cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. A single precise strike, pressure applied to the carotid artery, and the guard folded without sound. Marcus lowered him gently to gravel that whispered, but didn't shout. The veteran took the second guard with similar efficiency, moving with the kind of competence that only comes from decades of practice. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just professional violence applied with surgical precision. The third guard proved more aware, his head turning at some sound Marcus hadn't heard, hand moving toward his radio. Marcus fired first, the suppressed weapon coughing once, the sound no louder than a harsh breath. The guard dropped, and Marcus felt the familiar emptiness that came with taking a life, even one that probably didn't deserve mercy. Some weights never got lighter, no matter how necessary the carrying. They reached the loading dock, and the veteran produced tools that shouldn't have been available to retired personnel, but somehow were. The lock surrendered with a soft click, and they were inside, moving through darkness that smelled of motor oil and something else. Something metallic and wrong. Blood. Old and new. Marcus's enhanced night vision picked out details that made his jaw clench, signs of torture in a room designed for it. Tools arranged with care, stains that told stories no one should have to hear. This wasn't just a criminal operation, this was systematic brutality, refined over years into something approaching art for people who'd forgotten how to be human. Voices drifted from deeper in the warehouse, speaking Russian in casual tones that suggested routine conversation rather than heightened alert. Marcus caught fragments about soccer scores and someone's girlfriend, the mundane concerns of men who inflicted horror for money and went home to normal lives without apparent cognitive dissonance. The veteran gestured toward a corridor, and they advanced with weapons raised, each step measured, each breath controlled. Years and training creating a silent language of shared purpose. At a junction, they split, Marcus taking left while the old analyst went right, flanking positions that would create crossfire if combat erupted. Through a grimy window, Marcus saw them. Viktor Sokolov bound to a chair, his face barely recognizable beneath swelling and bruising. The tattooed man stood nearby, examining his phone with the bored expression of someone waiting for confirmation to proceed with something unpleasant. Two other men played cards at a makeshift table, weapons within easy reach but attention focused on their game. And in the corner, barely visible, the bodies of the extraction team. 3 agents Marcus had never met, but whose sacrifice hung in the air like accusation. They'd followed orders, trusted their handler, believed the system would protect them. Reeves had sent them to die. Marcus felt rage crystallize into something colder and more useful. Rage was a liability. Rage made you stupid. But this clarity, this absolute understanding of what needed to happen and why, this was the weapon that mattered. He keyed the burner phone 2 clicks. The veteran's response came instantly, 1 click. Ready. Marcus counted down from 3 in his head, and on 0, they breached simultaneously from opposite doorways. The world exploded into motion and sound. Marcus's first shot took the card player on the left, center mass, professional grouping that guaranteed results. The veteran's weapon barked twice, dropping the second player before his hand reached his pistol. The tattooed man moved with impressive speed, diving behind cover while his weapon cleared its holster in one smooth motion. Victor's eyes went wide with desperate hope and absolute terror, his mouth working around the gag, trying to shout warnings or pleas, or maybe just acknowledgement that someone had actually come. Bullets chewed through plaster and concrete, creating dust clouds that turned the air into soup. Marcus rolled behind a support pillar, feeling impacts vibrate through steel, counting shots and calculating angles. The tattooed man was good, well-trained, not panicking despite the surprise. He was already moving toward better cover, toward positions that would give him advantage. The veteran flanked right, his movement still sharp despite decades removed from fieldwork, laying down covering fire that forced the tattooed man to choose between advancing and surviving. He chose survival, ducking behind machinery that probably dated to when this warehouse still manufactured things instead of suffering. "You came back," the tattooed man shouted, and Marcus heard grudging respect beneath the anger. "I told you what would happen, told you the smart choice." "I'm not smart," Marcus called back, circling, looking for angles. "I'm just stubborn." "Same thing that gets men killed." Return fire forced Marcus lower. "That old man you came with, he's dying tonight. Your asset is dying. You're dying. All because you couldn't accept reality." "Reality is negotiable," the veteran interjected, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "You'd know that if you'd spent less time intimidating waiters and more time studying actual tactics." The insult had its intended effect. The tattooed man shifted position, anger overriding discipline for just a moment, exposing himself for just a fraction of a second. Marcus took the shot, caught him in the shoulder, spinning him, weapon clattering across concrete. Marcus was moving before the man hit the ground, closing distance, weapon trained on center mass. The tattooed man looked up at him with those dead eyes, now touched with pain and something that might have been surprise. "You were supposed to run," he gasped, hand pressed against his bleeding shoulder. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "Everyone keeps telling me what I'm supposed to do, supposed to prioritize missions over people, supposed to trust the system, supposed to accept that sometimes evil wins because fighting costs too much." He kept his weapon steady, unwavering. "But I keep not doing what I'm supposed to, keep making choices that don't make sense on paper but feel right in ways that matter more." The veteran was already cutting Victor free, checking his injuries with efficient competence while keeping his own weapon accessible. He's alive, badly hurt but stable enough to move. Victor's eyes found Marcus through swollen lids, and the gratitude there was almost painful to witness. "You came," he whispered in accented English. "They said nobody would, said I was already dead." They were wrong. Marcus pulled out the burner phone, dialing a number the veteran had provided. It rang twice before a voice answered, crisp and professional. "This is Agent Marcus Chen. Authorization code Omega 7 Romeo. I need immediate tactical, medical, and extraction at these coordinates. Multiple hostile casualties, 1 friendly critical, 3 agents KIA, and I need you to place Special Agent Catherine Reeves under immediate arrest for treason, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." Silence on the line, broken by typing as information was verified and processed. Then, confirmed Agent Chen. "Assets inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Be advised, this call is being recorded and will be used as evidence in subsequent proceedings." Understood. Marcus looked at Victor, at the dead extraction team, at the warehouse that held evidence of systematic brutality. "Make sure it's thorough. Make sure it matters." "Copy that." The tattooed man laughed, wet and pained. "You think you've won? Think arresting one handler changes anything? The network is bigger than you imagine, deeper. You've cut off one tentacle. The beast barely notices." "Maybe," Marcus conceded. "But at least we're fighting. At least we're trying. That has to count for something." Sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer. The cavalry arriving too late to help, but soon enough to matter. Marcus sat down heavily, adrenaline starting to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. The veteran stood guard, weapon ready, but his eyes were on Marcus, measuring, assessing. "You did good, son," the old analyst said finally. "Better than good. You remembered what this is actually about." "What's that?" "People. Just people trying to protect each other in a world that makes it hard to care." He looked at Victor, at the dead agents, at the captured enemy. "You'll face consequences for this. Operating outside channels, unsanctioned assault. Plenty of bureaucrats will have opinions about proper procedure and chain of command. Let them," Marcus said, and meant it. I'd rather face consequences for doing right than live comfortably knowing I didn't. The warehouse filled with tactical lights and shouted commands, federal agents swarming with weapons drawn and procedures memorized. Paramedics rushed to Victor while others checked the bodies, confirmed what everyone already knew. The extraction team was gone, dead, because someone they trusted had sold them out. As they loaded Victor into the ambulance, he reached out, grabbed Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," he whispered, "for remembering I was worth saving." Marcus squeezed back, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. The ambulance pulled away, and he stood there in the industrial darkness, feeling every year of his 7 years, with the agency settling on his shoulders like accumulated weight. The veteran approached, handed him a bottle of water. "They'll want statements, debriefings, investigations into how this operation was conducted. It'll be messy." "Good," Marcus said. "Messy means people are paying attention, means maybe things change. Or maybe they don't. Maybe you just saved one man tonight and tomorrow the world is exactly as broken as it was yesterday." Marcus smiled, tired but genuine. "Then tomorrow I'll try to save another one. And the day after that, another. Eventually, maybe it adds up to something." The old man nodded slowly, respect and sadness mixing in his expression. "That's the hope we live on, isn't it? That individual choices matter, that showing up for people when the world says don't counts for something." He looked toward the diner district, miles away but somehow present. Started with defending an old man over soup, ended with bringing down a traitor and saving a life. Strange how the small moments lead to the big ones. "Not strange," Marcus corrected. "Inevitable. We're always choosing who we are, always deciding what matters. Today just made it clearer." Dawn was breaking over the warehouse district, painting rust and ruin in shades of amber and gold, transforming industrial decay into something almost beautiful. Marcus watched the light spread, feeling something shift inside him, some certainty about what came next. He'd face the consequences, accept the disciplinary actions, answer every question about protocols and procedures. And he'd do it all again if he had to, because some things mattered more than following orders. Some things were worth the cost. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the same corner booth at Bernie's diner, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him while the morning light filtered through windows that someone had actually cleaned for the first time in what looked like years. The place felt different now, though nothing had physically changed except the absence of Brandon, who'd quit 2 days after the news broke about the federal raid on the warehouse. Nobody knew if he'd left from guilt or fear, or simply the uncomfortable realization that his small cruelties had played out in front of someone capable of far greater violence, who'd somehow chosen restraint when he didn't have to. The new waitress was a middle-aged woman named Rita who moved with efficient kindness, refilling coffee without being asked, and remembering how customers took their eggs. Small improvements, small changes, the kind that didn't make headlines but somehow made the world fractionally less cruel. Marcus's phone sat on the table, silent for once, no urgent messages demanding his attention. He'd been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation into his unauthorized operation. His weapons and credentials temporarily surrendered, while people in suits decided whether he was a hero or a liability. The hearings had been exactly as tedious as expected, hours of questions about protocols and chain of command, and whether personal judgment could ever supersede established procedure. He'd answered honestly, knowing that honesty might cost him his career, but unable to find it in himself to lie about choices he'd make again without hesitation. The bell above the door chimed, and the veteran entered, moving with the same careful dignity he'd shown that first day, though now Marcus knew it wasn't frailty, but rather the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. He slid into the booth across from Marcus without invitation, the easy familiarity of shared experience eliminating the need for formality. "Heard from Victor," the old man said, accepting coffee from Rita with a grateful nod. "He's in protective custody, healing well, started cooperating with prosecutors. Says he wants to testify publicly. Let the world hear what happens when organized crime gets its hooks into communities nobody's watching." Marcus felt something ease in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying without fully acknowledging. "That's good. That's something." "It is." The veteran added sugar to his coffee with precise measurements, the ritual of it somehow soothing. "Also heard that Catherine Reeves is cooperating too. Gave up names, accounts, operational details. Seems betrayal flows both directions once the consequences become real. They're estimating 50 indictments across 3 states based on her testimony alone. 50 people who'll face justice because she sold out her partners as thoroughly as she sold out her agents." Marcus heard the bitterness in his own voice and didn't try to hide it. "I trained under her, trusted her, believed she cared about the work, about protecting people. She probably did once." The veteran's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen corruption enough times to recognize its patterns. Most people don't start out wanting to be villains. They make one compromise, tell themselves it's necessary, that everyone does it, that the system is already broken so their participation doesn't really matter. Then one compromise becomes 2, becomes 100, until they can't remember who they were before the choices started accumulating. Rita brought them both breakfast they hadn't ordered. Scrambled eggs and toast and hash browns, the kind of simple food that felt like comfort rather than sustenance. "On the house," she said with a smile that suggested she knew more than she was saying. "For customers who make the place feel safer just by being here." After she left, the veteran raised an eyebrow. "Word spreads in small towns. People know what you did, even if they don't know all the details. You're the Fed who came back for someone everyone said was already dead, who fought a whole criminal network with just an old man for backup." He smiled slightly. "Makes you something of a folk hero, which I imagine makes the bureaucrats evaluating your conduct very uncomfortable." "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know. That's precisely why it matters." The old man took a bite of eggs, chewed thoughtfully. "Got a question for you if you don't mind. That moment in the warehouse, when you had the tattooed man at gunpoint, wounded and helpless. You could have killed him, claimed self-defense, no one would have questioned it. But you didn't. Why?" Marcus had asked himself the same question 100 times in the week since, searching for an answer that felt true rather than convenient. "Because killing him would have made me more like them. Would have been choosing efficiency over principle, pragmatism over humanity. And if I cross that line, if I decide that some people don't deserve the rules because they're bad enough, then what's the point of any of it? What makes me different than the criminals who justify their actions by saying their victims deserved it? There's wisdom in that, harder wisdom than most people ever achieve." The veteran set down his fork, his expression serious. "You'll face criticism for it, you know. People who'll say you should have ended the threat permanently, that mercy is weakness, that fighting monsters requires becoming monstrous yourself. Let them criticize." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "I joined the agency to protect people, not to become another source of fear. The moment I forget that, the moment I start measuring my success by body counts rather than lives saved, I've lost something I won't get back." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the diner filling with morning regulars who nodded at Marcus with a respect he didn't quite know how to accept. Through the window, he could see the pawn shop across the street, now shuttered and wrapped in police tape, its secrets extracted and documented. The building would probably sit empty for years, a monument to crimes interrupted but not quite prevented. Small towns didn't recover quickly from discovering they'd been hosting darkness. "What will you do?" the veteran asked eventually. If they fire you, if the bureaucrats decide unauthorized heroics are too much liability to tolerate. Marcus had thought about this too, lying awake in the early hours when doubt crept in uninvited. Keep doing the work. Maybe not with a badge, maybe not with official sanction, but the work itself doesn't change. There are always going to be people like Victor who need someone to come back for them. Always going to be moments that demand we choose between what's easy and what's right. Private sector then. Security consulting. Lots of former agents make good money protecting corporate interests. Maybe. Or maybe I just show up wherever people need help and figure it out from there. Marcus smiled at the absurdity of it. The naive idealism that his training should have beaten out of him but somehow hadn't. I know it sounds foolish, impractical. But that day when I saw you being humiliated over soup money, something clicked. Realized I'd spent 7 years gathering intelligence and building cases while forgetting why any of it mattered. Forgot that behind every operation, every classified file, there are just people trying to survive in a world that's often cruel for no good reason. The veteran nodded slowly, understanding evident in his weathered features. You asked me once why I helped you, why I risked everything for an operation that could have gotten us both killed. Want to know the real answer? Please. Because I was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed as used up and irrelevant. That moment when you defended me, when you saw me as someone worth fighting for rather than just an obstacle or inconvenience, it reminded me I still had value. Still had something to contribute beyond memories and regrets. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. You gave me back my dignity before you even knew my name. That's worth more than you can possibly imagine. Marcus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. You saved Victor's life, saved mine too, probably. Seems like I still came out ahead in that exchange. Maybe we both did. Maybe that's how it works when people actually show up for each other, when they remember that every person they meet is fighting battles they can't see, carrying weights they never asked for. The old man finished his coffee, set down the cup with careful precision. The world's full of people like Brandon, like Catherine Reeves, who forgot how to care about anything except their own comfort and advancement. But it's also full of people like you, like Victor, like those agents who died believing their mission mattered. That ratio doesn't have to stay fixed. Every time someone chooses compassion over convenience, it shifts a little. Through the window, Marcus watched ordinary people going about ordinary lives, rushing to work or walking dogs or buying groceries, unaware of how close they'd come to something darker, taking permanent root in their community. Most would never know about the warehouse or the network or the federal agent who'd risked everything because he couldn't walk past injustice even when the mission required it. Their ignorance was a kind of victory, proof that evil had been stopped before it infected everything. I have to head out, the veteran said, standing with the same careful dignity that defined all his movements. Got a call from someone I used to work with. Seems there's a situation in Nevada that could use someone with my particular expertise and someone with your particular inability to ignore people in trouble. He left a business card on the table, different from the one he'd given Marcus before, this one showing just a phone number and nothing else. No pressure, no obligation. But if you decide protecting people matters more than protecting your career, give me a call. Turns out there's a whole network of us. Former agents, analysts, operators who got tired of watching protocol prevent justice. We're not official, not sanctioned, but we show up when it counts. Marcus picked up the card, feeling its weight somehow greater than simple paper should allow. This legal? Define legal. The veteran's smile was knowing and slightly mischievous. We don't break laws. We just operate in spaces where laws have trouble reaching, help people who fall through the cracks of official protection. Think of it as freelance heroism for a world that desperately needs more heroes and fewer bureaucrats. After he left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and his cold coffee, and the card that represented a future he'd never imagined 3 weeks ago. The investigation would conclude eventually. He'd either be reinstated with stern warnings about following procedure, or he'd be thanked for his service and escorted out of federal employment with a recommendation to find work elsewhere. Either outcome felt increasingly irrelevant compared to the larger question that had been crystallizing since that first moment in this diner when he'd seen an old man being humiliated and decided he couldn't stay silent. What kind of person did he want to be? Not what kind of agent, not what kind of employee, but what kind of human moving through a world that made it so easy to look away, to prioritize self-interest, to convince yourself that other people's suffering wasn't your responsibility. Rita came by with a fresh cup of coffee, this one actually hot. You planning to sit here all day contemplating life's mysteries, or you gonna eat those hash browns before they get cold? Marcus looked down at his plate, surprised to find he'd barely touched his food. Sorry, lost in thought. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? Complicated thoughts. He took a bite, tasted the simple goodness of properly seasoned potatoes. Trying to figure out what comes next, Rita glanced at the card still sitting on the table, then back at his face. You know what I think? I think the world has plenty of people who know exactly what comes next, who have everything planned and mapped and controlled. What it needs more of is people brave enough to admit they don't know, but who show up anyway and try their best. She patted his shoulder with maternal affection. You strike me as the showing up type. Rest will figure itself out. After she walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the screen that had been silent for weeks. No urgent missions demanding his immediate attention, no handler texting coordinates and deadlines. The quiet should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like holding his breath, waiting for permission to exhale that might never come from the people whose approval he'd spent 7 years seeking. He picked up the veteran's card again, turned it over in his fingers, felt the future it represented pulling at him with gravitational inevitability. No official sanction, no bureaucratic oversight, just people helping people because someone had to, and they'd chosen to be someone rather than nobody. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had always been enough. Marcus pulled out his own phone, typed a simple message to the number on the card. When do we start? The response came within seconds. We already have. Welcome to the team. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Bernie's diner, over the shuttered pawn shop, over a town that didn't know how close it had come to being consumed by darkness, or how thoroughly it had been saved by 2 people who refused to accept that caring too much was weakness. The light touched everything with impartial warmth, illuminating the beautiful and broken alike, reminding anyone paying attention that every day offered new chances to choose who you'd be when tested. Marcus finished his breakfast, left money on the table that included a generous tip, and walked out into that light, feeling lighter than he had in years. The investigation would conclude however it concluded. His career would survive or it wouldn't. But somewhere in Nevada, someone needed help that official channels wouldn't provide. And for the first time in his professional life, Marcus Chen was going to show up without waiting for permission. Because in the end, that's what separated the people who changed the world from the people who just observed it dying. Not superior tactics or resources or authority, just the simple willingness to see suffering and decide it mattered more than your comfort, to choose people over protocol, to defend someone's dignity over a bowl of soup, even when the mission required you to look away. The world didn't need more observers. It needed people who showed up. And Marcus had finally learned that showing up was often the most revolutionary act available to ordinary people living in extraordinary times. That sometimes the greatest heroism was simply refusing to stop caring when caring became inconvenient. He got in his car and drove toward whatever came next, carrying with him the lesson that had cost 3 agents their lives to teach him. That every person you meet deserves to be treated like they matter, because they do. And the moment you forget that is the moment you stop being someone worth becoming. The road stretched ahead, full of possibility and purpose, and Marcus drove toward it without hesitation, finally understanding that the question he'd been asking himself since the beginning had a simple answer that had been there all along. Why does a simple burger order sometimes feel like the most dangerous transaction in the world? Because it's never really about the burger. It's about whether we remember to treat each other like human beings deserve to be treated, even when nobody's watching and the easier choice is always available. It's about the small moments that reveal who we actually are beneath the professional masks and social performances. It's about choosing again and again to be someone who shows up for people who have no reason to expect anyone will. And in a world that so often demands we choose between being good and being successful, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse the choice entirely and insist that maybe, just maybe, showing up for each other is what success actually looks like.